Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment and information purposes only. It should not be relied upon as a base for any investment decision, for solicitation of to buy or sell any security. Either the host, guests, or clients of either may own securities discussed on this podcast. Today I have the coolest guest. It's Patrick Finn, and Patrick Finn is a Maritime Technology Analyst at Thetius. Do I pronounce it correctly? Is it Thetius?
Thetius, yep.
And is that, do you know it's from Greece mythology or?
I actually don't know the origin of the name, but
okay.
It sounds Greek.
It does. And it is a firm focused on analysis and research into emerging maritime technology. So I'm real excited to talk to you, Patrick. Welcome, first of all.
Thank you.
How are you? Oh, sorry. Hey, Patrick, you are looking at all these cutting edge technologies in the maritime world. You're thinking about the future of shipping. I'm so excited to talk to you about this. And I think there is an amazing opportunity in shipping. You aren't just like a consultancy guy with a background in a lot of consultancy jobs, but you came up through the maritime ranks. You actually went to a college to become an officer, right? And like become a naval officer.
It purely civilian, but Marine.
If I say officer, that's implies that's Marine.
I've got you. Yeah, terminology.
Oh, okay. And you've worked at different kinds of vessels, different roles. Can you tell us a little bit about your career and what kind of responsibilities you've held?
Yeah, so I really started out at Maine Maritime Academy, and that exposed me really to just how broad the industry is. Any operation in the water, whether it's marine construction or oil and gas or purely just cargo transport, and then all of the subsectors under there. I really when I attended the academy, I was in a program for limited tonnage, so I wasn't really focused on the big ships, but what the education afforded me was it gave me a much broader perspective of what was going on, and a portion of that was in marine technology, what made ships work, so engineering really, predominantly my job has been to operate and maintain the vessels, and so I've largely worked on a contract basis, bouncing from boat to boat, company to company, and being youthful and full of energy. It really gave me the opportunity to see how different sectors of the industry work and just how different they all are. And, it's taken me to, I've spent some time in the South Pacific and on a tugboat in Alaska, moving oil up into the Arctic to places with no infrastructure at all. You're literally just racing the ice as it recedes in the summertime and running back down as it comes in on you. And so there would be facilities there, really just tank farms ashore, and you would just plow the barge up onto the beach because there was no dock. And you'd run out with the big fuel hose, you and the guys, and there would be some locals that would keep an eye out for the bears, which was a thing. But also I've ended up working for naval-owned research vessels out of Honolulu and tugboats around New York Harbor. So, the really congested waters around there. And I got to see the difference between how different companies operate and what their drive is, and you know, the amount of funding that a company puts into its equipment, and how that really can change, and the pace of work. And I've also had the rare privilege to work aboard several traditional, you might call them tall ships. So that really opened my eyes up to quite a bit, because you're on these traditional vessels, and it's not just yachting. It's a lot of work. You know, you're doing all these things manually, and it got me to really thinking about how everything's changed in the technology, everything from synthetic line to epoxy paints to you know, just the power system on board, and hydraulics and but when I'm out at sea for a long time, I'm an avid reader. I'm a news junkie. When you're out at sea for a long time, you just don't, your cell phone doesn't work, none of that. So you have no idea what's going on. And I would, whenever I got reception or whatever, I would just feed on the news. And I was catching these headlines of you know, autonomous vessels in hydrogen diesel hybrid ferries, and you know, this digital ledger blockchain that would just potentially revolutionize the logistics industry. And I really just kept digging and digging, and I started to get concerned, because the rate of change that the industry has had in just 50 years is phenomenal. You know, you can now operate a big container ship with, you know, 12 people. You know, 50 years ago, you needed 30, maybe more. So I started to really dig, and because nobody in my circle was talking about this stuff. Even on the commercial side of things, the industry is slow to change. Investments need to be proved before, and basically required before anybody's going to spend money on it. So I was in between. I was kind of in between work about a little over a year ago, and I really started to dig, and just way past the headlines. I went right into the white papers and the theses, and you know, watched what the big players were doing, and off of that, I realized I had a you know, a good solid sense of what was going on, and so I wrote a big, you could call it an article, but it was, you know, several pages long. And I decided to try to get it published, and I bounced around, and I don't know anything about publishing really. And so I threw it up on my LinkedIn, and I was reached out to by the head of Thetius, which is based out of the UK. And Thetius is a fairly new company, but they're in a very unique sector. Basically what Thetius does is we maintain a database and tabs on everything technology that's happening within the maritime industry. And there is a lot. And the industry is, like I said, it's old, it's slow to change, but with new environmental regulations coming down the pipe, and kind of this constant shoestring budget that shippers are operating on, anything that can save costs or help a vessel remain in compliance, you know, throughout the vessel's life, is just, it's more important than it ever was. And so we do analysis and consulting work, and some of our partners and clients have been British Petroleum, BP, and Inmarsat. but a large portion of our clientele are, I don't want to call them smaller companies, but established companies that have a technology or are looking to build out and improve, and just a lot of people in a lot of companies don't really understand what's happening in the sector, in the technological side of the maritime, and with laws changing all the time, especially on the environmental section of things, you know, there's a demand for it, and where do you fit that technology, or how do you improve it? What's the best route to improve it, or are you just wasting your money in development?
Right, but I can imagine that it's real challenging, because just this IMO 2020 that went into effect, just that was incredibly challenging. And my understanding as you know, an outsider, is that there's so much regulation, like once you're inside ports, so, and there can be like differences.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a little bit of an international story, but if you do like international ports that are and it can be about ridiculous little things, like yeah, I can imagine that it's just real challenging. But and I hope that we get into a lot of that. Yeah, I'm sorry to did it interrupt you?
No, it's
Okay, well, it's because it's kind of funny how we met. You actually contacted me because I wrote an article on Scorpio Bulkers, and they're making a super unusual move, because they are selling all of their bulk carriers, and they are planning and actually executing on that plan to invest the proceeds into wind turbine installation vessels, and those are huge vessels. I think they're more than $200 million each.
More than that, yeah.
Yeah, maybe even 300 million, and they're able to place these. No, you told me they're like those wind turbines. They are 2 times as large as like 300 feet or something. Or am I?
Kind of the latest generation of wind turbines. So that's the 12 megawatts. They're it's megawatts. They're anywhere between 700 feet tall and taller than 800 feet. I think the latest the absolutely cutting edge that GE just pushed out was a 13 megawatt turbine, and that was, I think, 820 something feet tall. And so in perspective, the Statue of Liberty is 300 feet tall. So when you're thinking installation vessels, you know,
they're big.
They're big, and they're not just installation vessels. They basically will carry with them all of the parts of a wind turbine on board.
And the crane as well, or is there a separate crane vessel?
If they're an installation vessel, they have a crane.
Okay.
And it is just absolutely massive. You know, it's absolutely massive.
Yeah,
crane.
it's
so
just to, I'll finish my my thought, because it's so unusual that Scorpio Bulkers is executing on this plan. I wrote about it, and you actually reached out to me because I posited that the Biden's plan to be more aggressive on offshore wind could be, could make this work, or is at least a positive. And you're not so sure, actually, because of the Jones Act. And well, maybe you can start by explaining what the Jones Act is.
Well, I'll touch on that article real briefly. I really like to follow economic news because it presents with you a whole bunch of angles. For instance, I really wasn't keeping tabs on Scorpio Bulkers, and really the concept of them switching to installation vessels is probably a very smart business plan. But the U.S. industry is really quite different. The domestic maritime industry for the United States is quite different than most of the rest of the world, and that really falls under the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, which is called the Jones Act. But the Jones Act, when somebody says the Jones Act, it can mean a number of things. You know, the Jones Act itself is 4 or 5 pages printed, and the law is 100 years old at this point, this year. But really, when you say Jones Act compliant, what the Jones Act is, on a very basic level, is it's a law within the United States that requires that domestic maritime trade, if a vessel is engaged in trade within American ports, that vessel has to be made in America. It has to be made with American steel, and it has to be crewed mostly by Americans, American nationals, and it has to also be mostly owned by Americans. And the idea behind this, it's kind of a neat idea, but it does present some issues. But the real idea behind this was, if the United States could legally protect and encourage its maritime industry to be strong and independent, then come a time of war, World War II, where we just needed everything we had, we would have the ability to build ships in our experienced shipyards. We would have a civilian army of mariners and officers who could operate and drive them. So it was the Jones Act is supposed to foster this reserve civilian go to war time fleet, and there's a long history of it, being another branch of the military, but kind of. Yeah, but there's also, it's not just the Jones Act. There's several laws that are kind of thrown into the Jones Act books, or on the table alongside the term.
What do you think? Like, what's the effect that it has on the maritime industry, like the commercial industry?
So alongside the Jones Act, you also have the Foreign Dredge Act of 1906, the Passenger Vessel Service Act of 1886, and so it all just blankets into each other, and it all effectively creates that same environment where the United States industry exists in a bubble, and how the Jones Act and the associated laws affect the maritime industry in the United States really depends on who you ask. It really depends on who you ask. To some degree, within the domestic industry here, the Jones Act is like a gospel. We're going to the academy, and out in the industry, the unions. The Jones Act is what gave you your job.
Right.
It's what protects your job. Otherwise, foreign vessels and operators will come in here and outbid you. So certainly in today's environment, if the Jones Act just disappeared tomorrow, it would cause pure chaos. A lot of people would lose their jobs. But because the domestic industry exists in this protectionist bubble that's really quite unique compared to any other law or industry within the United States. There's comparisons, but none is quite strong as the Jones Act, and none is as least updated, to put it bluntly. It's rare that it gets examined, and the economic implications of the Jones Act are really difficult. And again, it depends on who you ask, but there's a lot of data out there. And basically, really the numbers that scream at me is because they've existed in this protectionist bubble, the shipyards have not had to compete on an international level. There's been no competition in the maritime transport sector, and so there's been kind of a lot of stagnation. It's been said that the United States merchant fleet is 2 to 3 decades behind the rest of the world technologically, and just in its ability to produce value. And so if you compare the international fleet to the United States Jones Act fleet, because it is very different. You can't talk about the United States fleet without the Jones Act. The average age of a container ship in the international fleet, right now, the average age is 12 years. So 12 years, that's fairly new. That's fairly new. That means that they were built, ideally to comply with, the lifespan of the ship, maybe 25 years of compliance with future regulations and, new safety clauses. Whereas the average age of a container ship in the United States fleet is 30 years old. So that's almost 3 times as old as the international fleet. And so what that gets you is
the average age?
Average age of a container ship produced in the United, that is Jones Act flag.
And I don't mean to, maybe you know this, but is the maintenance like relatively inexpensive compared to like new builds? Or because I think, with maintenance, you can keep a lot of different kind of vehicles going, but it's usually just too expensive.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why Jones Act vessels are so old is, and why they're really drawn out in their life, is because it's cheaper. It's very expensive in the United States to build a new ship.
Right.
It can be something like 4 to 5 times more expensive to build a container ship in a United States shipyard than, say, in South Korea or Japan or Northern Europe. It's almost like Jones Act ships are built out of sheer necessity. The company, this thing's just rusting away. It's failed inspection. There's no hope. Whereas in the international world, ship owners have more flexibility, and the return on investment for a ship is a lot shorter, just because the costs are a lot cheaper. So if you look at shipbuilding in the United States in context of the Jones Act, there was between 1983 and 2013, approximately 300 U.S. shipyards have closed. And so, and that's just because there's not many orders for ships because U.S. ship owners just use them for as long as they can, and really just get everything they can out of them. And so today there is, I think, 4 U.S. shipyards that are capable of building large ocean-going ships. Just 4 of them.
So
yeah, I mean,
Philly shipyards.
Yeah, there's 4 shipyards in the United States that are capable of building a ship.
Right.
Most of the Jones Act fleet, there's something like 20,000 U.S. flagged vessels, Jones Act vessels in the United States, and most of them, the overwhelming majority of them, are barges and tugboats and supply vessels. And currently, right now, we have 80, around somewhere over 80 ocean-going ships. And you know, over the past decade, we've managed to produce, you know, 2 to 3 a year.
Okay.
So really, the economics of the Jones Act are a real challenge, and what that also spans, you know, you have similar laws like the Foreign Dredge Act, which is basically applies directly to the dredging industry, and it's the same thing. You look at the Army Corps of Engineers, which is you know, our government's dredging sector that makes up.
Is it actually the Dredging Act that you believe will hamper this offshore wind industry, or?
Yeah. So
instead of the Jones Act itself, or?
That will be a factor.
Okay, a factor.
But yeah, we'll get into the current legalities of it. But you know, our dredge fleet is you know, if you compare our largest dredging company to the largest European dredging company, you know, there's the difference is just massive. It's, you know, I think by the hopper dredge capacity between the Great Lakes Dredge and Dock and the largest European one, there's like a 900% difference in what they're capable of doing. So yeah, how could the Jones Act hamper or affect the offshore wind industry? So I really started to dig into this because I was really excited about this offshore boom that's about to happen. We know it's been happening in Europe, in Southeast Asia, just these you know, big wind farms popping up. You know, in the United States, we got these like little pilot projects. We got the Block Island Wind. I think that's like 5 wind turbines. And then there's the Virginia Offshore. We just finished the pilot project, so we got 2 wind turbines there. And so currently the way the laws are set up, so the Jones Act really just strictly says, you know, if you're operating within 3 miles of shore, port to port or whatever, you come into port, you leave, you come back to a U.S. port, then the Jones Act applies. But there's been other laws, such as the Outer Continental Shelf Act, which really came into game with the offshore drilling, because obviously these offshore platforms are more than 3 miles offshore, but they're still in federal jurisdiction or state waters. And so the Jones Act lobby is very powerful, and the psychology behind it is very convincing. And so the Outer Continental Shelf Act, basically what that did was it applied all federal laws to projects happening on the outer continental shelf that were harvesting material from the shelf, basically stuff that the United States owned. You know, it's within our federal jurisdiction, it's our minerals. And so to really just to extend, you know, the rights of the Jones Act and this, you know, fortification of the industry, oil and gas drilling, anything involving that was applied to oil and gas. But but currently, the way that word is that law is worded is a gray area. It's a gray area, and because it specifically says obtaining materials wherein the continental shelf. It doesn't say anything about, you know, sticking a post in the ground and turning a wind turbine. So because of that, the Block Island project and the Virginia Offshore project was completed with foreign vessels, non-Jones Act vessels. And you better believe the Jones Act lobby took it straight to the courts. And it went to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and they looked at it, and their assessment was, well, the Jones Act doesn't apply here, provided these installation vessels provided these installation vessels stay right where they are, just do the construction, and all of the material, anything that involves a port, gets done with a Jones Act vessel. So, there's basically two ways right now to build offshore wind. And one way is to use all Jones Act compliant, and then you can hop in and out of ports, you can move things, you can do whatever you want. But we don't, there's no installation vessels in the U.S. fleet. So that's not an option.
Zero, there's not one.
Zero. And I'll touch on the numbers for that later, but we just don't have it. These are highly specialized vessels, and you can't just throw a crane onto, you know, an oil and gas jackup ship.
Yeah.
There are conversions that have happened, but you know, that presents itself a whole set of challenges.
And now my understanding has been that in September, your House of Representatives passed the Clean Economy, Jobs and Innovation Act. And Congress, it's now in Congress, and they ask for like clarifications of that bill with regards to these wind installation vessels. Is that correct? And could this be a breakthrough or help or hurt this industry, this nascent industry?
So it's so what is happening is the way legislation works. It goes to the House, which is you know, the House, then it goes to the Senate, and then if both of those pass clear, it then might get signed off by the president, becomes law. So HR 4447, which is the Clean Economy, Jobs and Innovation Act. In that, there was a congressman out of California that was very much pro Jones Act, and the Jones Act is largely bipartisan. It receives a huge amount of support, despite kind of this set of data that's been rolling in, even from government reports, that presents the challenges of it. But so this bill got passed in the House. So it still needs to go to Congress, and if it passes Congress, it would have to go to the presidency to become law. Now, kind of speculating about politics, it's difficult to tell right now who's going to be in control of Congress. But if Mitch McConnell is still Speaker, that bill may never get there. But who knows at this point? But what this law would do, there was a clause in there that was added that would clarify that gray area and effectively apply all federal law, the Jones Act, the dredging, everything, to offshore wind. And so if that made it to the Senate next year, cleared the Senate, and got sent to probably Biden's desk, and got passed, then all of the offshore wind projects that are in the works right now, there's I think 151 kind of projects total in the United States, and really there's not much is happening at the moment. We finished Block Island, we finished the Virginia pilot program, but in the docket is some absolutely massive wind farm projects, and the sooner we get them going, the better, because if we look at the science, climate change, this should have happened yesterday in a perfect world. And so if this law came to pass, it would immediately halt any construction, all options, we used ships flagged out of Luxembourg and Malta to do these installations in Block Island and Virginia. That would just be totally off the table. It wouldn't be an option. So if it passed and the Jones Act applied to offshore wind, which that's really the status quo, unless something amazing happens, that's what will happen. That will sever the United States offshore wind industry from the rest of the world.
So, and that's your default scenario. Like, you think that's a high probability scenario?
Very high probability.
And you think it's like 90 or 60%?
I'd say 95%, maybe higher.
Ooh.
95%. And there are potentials to it. These are kind of extraordinary times that we're living in. And so I wouldn't throw it right out the window, but there are possible things that can happen, and I'll go into that a bit.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because what did you want to go into?
Well, I'll
Okay, let me ask you a question. Or this, because it will help me see if I understand everything correctly. So the Jones Act requires all goods shipped between U.S. ports to be transported by U.S. vessels and operated by Americans and some other, lesser measures. But technically, you could use an installation vessel and just operate from one port, or not even just leave it out at sea. And that gets disrupted if this dredging act is applied.
Yeah, basically the blanket of federal laws, the Jones Act, all of these things. The Jones Act is really at the forefront of this.
We're sort of fading the Jones Act by operating as I just described. And
so as a result, like the current operation, the Block Island project, I mean, it was the first offshore wind project we had in the United States, and it was really a long time coming. There was a number of projects that had been proposed that had just been shot down. And so in some aspects, the Block Island project just happened. But in other aspects, it took actually quite a lot longer than it could have. And part of that was because to skirt the Jones Act in the current legal environment, the installation vessels had to just stay where they were offshore and do their work. And so barges had to basically, most of the components weren't built in the United States. So they were shipped to the United States, dropped off, and then Jones Act barges and associated vessels would pick that material up and bring it to the installation vessel. The installation vessel would just have to crane that up, put it on board, put all the stuff on board, and then they could start working. Typically, the installation vessel, it's a ship, it's a jack-up ship. They cross oceans, they can do anything that a normal ship can do, really. Typically, an installation vessel would go into port and just get all that stuff right on board like that, and then head back out there. They'd be fully loaded. It would happen quickly with the shoreside cranes. They wouldn't have to deal with kind of the waves and swells of the ocean with crane ops. And so
that's actually a much more efficient way of operating.
Absolutely. And so the current way it's happening is not efficient, but it's the only way we have right now. So should the Jones Act become applied, then, and we get Jones Act installation vessels, it's going to become quicker. But yeah, when it comes to what you would ask me about with, can you just use like a buffer vessel so you don't have to use these, or find some clever loophole where you just visit a port in and out to skirt the Jones Act? It's really just point to point with the Jones Act. So and then when you apply these other blanket federal laws, there's really no getting around it. There are operations, like when I was working in Alaska, we had a Russian tanker that trailed us up the coast that stayed 5 miles offshore, and we would just run our barges out to them and get their oil and then bring it into Barrow or Nome or wherever. So there are ways around it, but if this law passes and the status quo continues, you really can't skirt it in this situation.
And then we get into a situation where the U.S. has no wind turbine installation ships. So this would potentially be great for like shipbuilders.
It could be, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but then there's also like President Trump waived the Jones Act for Puerto Rico in 2017, and I'm actually not. I'm not up on the up and up about the exact details, but there was a disaster, so he decided to waive those requirements so they could get supplied cheaper and better. Could Biden use, like, I don't know, maybe use a presidential order? Could Biden do a similar thing to allow the offshore wind industry to develop, like for a limited time period until?
So yes, he could.
Okay,
absolutely.
That's promising.
But it has to be presented in a very specific light. And this is that 5% chance I talked about. And to be honest, I'm really for the U.S. maritime industry. I think there's a lot of potential here, but we're just so far behind, and it's really it's a little bit disappointing for me, who's now a technology analyst, looking at everything that's happening in the world. I look at my own country and it's just embarrassing. So
maybe it's a little bit of I totally get like this the idea behind the Jones Act, that you want to protect your naval industry or for military purposes, especially like if you're a nation the size of the United States.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can't easily, replace a navy of your size.
No.
But on the other hand, I'm from the Netherlands, which is kind of a developed country. Maybe not as rich as the United States, but it's doing pretty well.
I think you
And
guys do just fine over there.
yeah, and labor isn't cheap at all.
Yeah.
There's a lot of government regulation around that, but it's we compete building ships. Maybe there's some the European Union has its own ways of protecting that industry, but there's large shipyards, and so I'm sure that I'm not sure the U.S. needs it. Like,
Well, it's yeah, it's just I mean, there's a lot of other implications that have happened kind of as a result of the expense of U.S. maritime shipping, and the number one mode of transport to move goods in the United States is trucking. And when you look at just the fuel economy of it, the economy of tonnage, it doesn't make sense when you can ship it by barge or by ship up and down the coast. Our highways are just super congested. But because of the expense kind of artificially created by the Jones Act, that's just what happens. And because of that, there's been a steady decline. That's one factor, but that's perhaps why there's been a steady decline in the maritime industry here. But to return back to the waiving of the Jones Act, this is where I think it gets really interesting. And unfortunately, the subject is highly politicized here. And so the Jones Act is really only allowed to be waived for times of national crisis. You can have foreign vessels do work domestically if there's been a waiver given to them for essentially national security purposes. That's why whenever there's a hurricane that blows through, and whether it's Puerto Rico or here in the Northeast, where all of a sudden there's no fuel or rock salt for the roads, the waiving of the Jones Act becomes a hot topic quickly, to potentially ease that burden and allow other available vessels to move in and fill that gap. In Canada, they allow waivers. They have a very similar law in Canada, but they allow waivers based on economic need. If there's a deficit, if there's a void, a demand that's not being met in Canada, then the government allows waivers based on economic need for 1-year contracts. And if the domestic operator pops up, it goes to them. But we don't have that here. And so the Jones Act really only gets waived for emergencies, crisis, national security, anything like that. And so it's got to be a big thing that happens. And so even when something comes to the president's desk to waive it, for when Puerto Rico just gets smoked by a hurricane, instantly the Jones Act lobby moves in and they're fighting it, because the way they see it is, if there's an inch given to open up that door, somebody's going to move in and pry it open.
Right.
And then they talk a lot about, the national security and merchant marine. So it's, there's legitimate reason for the Jones Act, but there's also, we need to expand. We need a stronger domestic industry. Mm-hmm. But so if you consider that wind turbines, offshore wind turbines, if you collectively take all of the offshore wind energy that the United States could just obtain, all of which obviously this is just never going to happen. We could power every household in the country twice. There's a lot of wind energy off the coast of kind of the central Northeast. And if we take climate change seriously, then and recognize what the national security experts, the Pentagon, the reports that have been released, basically, I mean, not basically, they've said climate change is a national security issue. You know, all of our naval bases across the world and domestically, our ports, our cities, you know, rising sea level is already taking effect. And it is the climate crisis. It's not just a national crisis, it's a global crisis. So if offshore wind energy is so viable, and at this point proven, somebody should present it to Biden or to Congress, or to MIRAD or some, you know, it as a issue of national security. And that is how it could be waived to allow the industry to really get off the ground and get moving.
Yeah, I can see like another line of reasoning. I don't know, maybe I'm fantasizing, but it could be United States doesn't want to fall back in this energy technology behind China, for example, is a popular line of reasoning currently.
Yeah, these days.
Yeah, just something like that. But this only, you put only a 5% chance on this kind of line of reasoning being leveraged to open this market up, and for a couple of years, and then I think you'll still have problems in the Supreme Court. But you know, then we're 5 years on, or 10
really,
years.
Waiving the Jones Act is really, you know, it's a right of the executive, and as long as it's, you know, for a national crisis, it would be legitimate. I say 5%, but I'd say it's a strong 5%, if that means anything. If one of the reasons why I'm so concerned about this, and I have been trying to stir the pot, I've got a few conversations going, is because, you know, if the Jones Act rolls in, and there's already a deficit of installation vessels, if the Jones Act rolls in, then we're doing nothing until the earliest 2023. And so, and I say that because right now, as far as globally, turbine installation vessels, there's total, we have 32 installation vessels that are active. And then—
You mean globally or?
Globally. Globally. So there's not that many. They're capable of doing quite a bit.
Okay. They age pretty fast too, right? Because those turbines were getting taller and taller.
Yeah, so the Block Island wind farm was built with 5 megawatt turbines, which aren't, I mean, they're tall, but the way the technology has been progressing is these turbines can pump out, you know, now they can pump out more than twice that amount of energy.
Yeah.
You know, with the 12 megawatt turbines. But
and people should look into the cost, because that's interesting, because it's very competitive.
It is, and it means there's less turbines that need to be installed. It generates more power, and it's the construction, the overall construction cost is much cheaper. And so, you know, you don't have to have equipment out there as long. You need bigger equipment. And so what's been happening, we have these 32 installation vessels globally, but just in the last decade, turbine technology has gone right up. And you know, I think the latest turbine GE released is a 13 megawatt That's the generator, and there's already I've seen flickers of discussions about 15 megawatt. How big those are going to be, I don't know, but they'll get bigger. And so what's been happening right now in the current marketplace is that we have all of these offshore wind projects, off China, South Korea, all over Europe, and now the United States is about to build, it's on the table, some of the largest wind farms in the world. And it will happen, but you're really presented with this. There's currently a deficit. 32 are currently active. I think there's 5 in the docket for construction or are being built. And domestically in the United States, we have 0. There's none.
Yeah.
There's none. But there is one that is in paper form at the moment. So Dominion Energy has basically signed on and to have built the first Jones Act compliant wind turbine installation vessel.
And Dominion Energy is like a large utility, right?
Yeah, they're one of the major players. They partnered right up there with Ørsted.
And a move like that, it bankrupts a shipping company if it goes wrong. But like a utility can probably handle that blow.
Yeah, exactly. So the return on an investment for a vessel like that, they really need to be operating around the clock. They need to install somewhere between 500 megawatts and 800 megawatts annually for 4 to 5 years before they recoup that cost of the vessel.
The bad scenario is that your competitors have the vessels from Korea. That's the bad scenario. You can write it off, but that's okay for a utility.
Yeah, it's really, provided there's no holdups. Right now we've kind of halted a lot of the large projects to do kind of environmental studies, because right now we have, I don't know, just a handful of wind turbines that we have experience with in this country, and we're about to install, the Virginia offshore farm could be one of the largest in the world. So there are still holdups that are happening. It's not given. It's not a promise. It's highly likely. But so this installation vessel is slated to be in operation by 2023. I don't know what it costs, but
and do you how much can one vessel do a lot, or?
One vessel can do a lot. Once everything's all set up, it's they're just craning material onto the foundation, and then that gets assembled and they slap it on and they move on to the next one. So one installation vessel is capable of moving along pretty quickly, provided that all of the vessels associated with it and that vessel are set up correctly for smooth operations. And when you throw in the costs comparatively, a US built wind turbine installation vessel could cost anywhere between, I've seen figures like 60, 80% to 200% more to build one of those vessels in the United States than elsewhere. So, we really got to have our ducks in a row to make this work well.
Yeah. So now let me summarize your argument a little bit, because I've been writing about Scorpio Bulkers. They are acquiring all these wind turbine installation vessels. They want to, go to work, and there's a large offshore industry outside the United States, but it would be very nice with the changing guard, if they could go to work in the United States, it probably pays well. That's probably not working. So yeah, that's too bad. On the other hand, no, that's really a negative. But that's what you believe, or at least that it will be delayed for several years.
Yeah, I mean, Scorpio Bulkers, I haven't examined them too closely, but I don't, just kind of looking at the list in your article, and none of them appear to be U.S. flag. And so, I mean, there's a huge demand for installation vessels right now. And I think it's expected, the demand for installation vessels in the next decade, the next 10 years, is expected to increase by 4 to 5%. Sorry, 4 to 500%.
Right. Yeah.
We really need that capacity. And so your thoughts on Scorpio Bulkers moving to installation vessels, especially if they don't build them in the United States, they can service all of the other projects. But I would personally be surprised if they don't already have a vested interest in the domestic industry here. It's not going to be in the United States. It's just it's a possibility, but I don't think any reasonable company that is happily operating outside of the Jones Act is about to join the fray.
Right.
So now, when it comes to shipbuilding in the United States, the way the oil markets are in international trade, and kind of what's on the docket for shipyards today, I think we have like 3 ships that are getting finished right now in the United States, that should come into service in 2021. But there was just a report that went to Congress that really kind of summarized, focused mostly on the oil sector. With oil prices as low as they are, and there really just being a glut in the market, and in prior years, we really had been internationally and nationally, we've really been building a lot of tankers. Something like 60% of the Jones Act ocean-going fleet is tankers. So we have tankers, oil tankers, but the economic outlook for domestic shipbuilding, in that aspect, there's nothing there. There's nothing driving demand for new container ships or tankers. We haven't even built an LNG tanker. We don't have any in this country, which is a story unto itself. That's why Puerto Rico buys its LNG from Trinidad, and occasionally Russia instead of Texas. There's no transport there. So yeah, Puerto Rico gets 39–40% of its energy generated by natural gas on the island, and they obtain an absolutely minuscule amount of it from the United States. The LNG they do obtain from the U.S., which is one of the larger producers of LNG because of the fracking industry, they get small shipments of it in containers, basically, in tank containers that are moved by barge, mostly by Crowley. But they're getting it from Trinidad, and they've had a few shipments from Russia, which really stirred up the news. But so domestically, our shipbuilding outlook right now is pretty dismal.
Right.
There's really not much in the books for large ships.
Yeah.
So if you apply the current data on that to this offshore wind boom, if the Jones Act does get applied to it, and it would be a good thing to be able to have these installation vessels go into port. would save a lot of money and time. It can be done without them. But if the Jones Act applies, if this law comes into fruition next year, next session, or the likes, I think the industry, the domestic, the offshore wind building industry in the United States is just going to grind to a halt, mostly. And the big players like Ørsted will kind of say, well, okay, we'll put it on the back burner and we're going to invest our energy elsewhere until you guys can get your act together. And so the Dominion, installation vessel will come online in 2030. Great Lakes Dredge and Dock, who is the largest dredging company in the United States. They're publicly traded. I think it's
GDD or something.
LD or something like that.
Yeah. I'll put it in the show notes.
And they have recently announced that they're going to build a specialized like sub-rock dredge, basically to help build the foundations for these things. You don't just like pile drive one of these things into the muck on the bottom. You really have to dredge out a whole area and then create a foundation, install the installation foundation, and that really takes a whole separate slew of specialized vessels that can handle the deep water. And the United States dredging industry, we did a bit for the offshore oil and gas, but it's quite different.
Yeah, that's something that I wanted to ask you about, because I've found a lot of companies that have these platform supply vessels, I think they're called. They perform all kinds of different jobs to supply oil and gas installations, but the offshore oil and gas has been dead for since shale got big, and now they're all rusting away. Actually dry docked, or not all of them, but like half of them or something.
Yeah.
You can buy them so cheap in the public markets. Is that worth it? Could they be utilized in the wind industry, or we don't have to like go deeply into this, but what are your thoughts?
So there are and there have been jack-up ships. It's really what an installation vessel is. It's a jack-up ship. Basically, you might call them spuds, and they just drop these giant stilts down into the mud, and they jack themselves up, and then they can drill for oil. You throw a crane on there, a big enough crane, and they can, lift things like turbines, and install them, and assist with the foundation work and all of that. But the issue is there have been jack-up ships that have been converted to turbine installation vessels. But you really have to take into account a few things. You can't just do it across the board. Drill rigs aren't that big.
Oh, right.
They're just not that big.
But those are like the large ones, right? And what about like these smaller vessels? It's not platform vessels, it's like supply vessels.
Yeah, offshore service vessels for wind turbines or wind farms. That's a better option. But when you just look at an offshore supply vessel versus a service vessel for oil and gas and wind, you kind of look at them, just they're on the wall. They look pretty similar, but you need to consider that maybe these vessels are going to hold some massive piece of hardware for a bit, or transport it, and they'll need to be fitted with cranes. And so really the best suited offshore supply vessels for retrofitting are going to be ones that are already large enough to handle this equipment, and are already fitted with cranes. And then there's a cat.
Yeah, but I
So
noticed that like even the oil and gas supply vessels, they're extremely customized. There's
yeah,
yeah, a
yeah,
lot of different types.
there's just, you know, dozens of different types of offshore supply vessels, and they're all very specialized, and some are more diverse for others. You know, some just kind of move general cargo and get it off, but
Okay.
offshore wind is such a specialized construction project that
Yeah.
you have limited
But
options.
yeah, but
If
on
you're
the
a
other
junior,
hand, like and please correct me if I'm wrong, like some of them are like to house people or the people like living quarters out on the
yeah,
sea. And I mean, that's probably required in offshore wind as well as in
mhm.
oil and gas. I mean, wood gas is not so different, but uh, you see some potential, but it has a lot of difficulties as well.
Yeah. I mean, so, housing is a thing because they're not going to truck people in and out all
Yeah,
day. There's around the clock projects, and so some installation vessels are designed to hotel 60 people.
right.
So yeah,
That could work. Hey, and I've been keeping you for a long time already, but I don't have maritime technologies on every day. So I want to quickly touch on some cool, exciting things that are happening, and I hope to get you back another time, and we can talk uh, more in depth about these things. But yeah, I'm just one thing that I'm really curious about because this seems to be the big question in the industry. Globally, shipping companies are not ordering vessels. And the big problem is the upcoming environmental regulation. And they just don't know what kind of propulsion or levels of emission will be allowed. And so they're just not ordering. And where are you placing your bets, or what are your best guesses what we're going to see on that front?
that's that's a real interesting question that a lot of people are asking. Before I get into it, I'm going to throw one more thing back into our previous conversation,
Oh, sure.
and this is what I'm waiting for, and this will clarify a lot of issues. So the Defense Authorization Act of 2020 that came out around this time last year. Within it, there was basically a study that was mandated. And that study is, what exactly is it called? That study is basically to take an inventory of all the vessels that are needed for the new offshore infrastructure projects. And so the report was supposed to come out in this summer. And so basically what it will do is inventory all of the vessels that we have that can do this work. Probably inventory the vessels that could be retrofitted. I'm not sure about that, but it's likely. It's almost certainly within the report. And then basically it's going to focus right in on the vessels. And in reference to offshore wind and development, this report was supposed to come out in June or July of this year, 6 months after its mandate. And it hasn't come out yet. I've been in touch with a few people in DC, and it's basically the report's been submitted to the government approval office, and it's being vetted. But it's been there for a long time. So
Right,
I'm
but
still.
I think the current administration is sort of notorious for taking a long time with some offshore wind projects. Other things they're really fast, but
Yeah, I'm not going to speculate on that front, but when that report comes out, and I hope it comes out soon, I check almost every day, it will give us so much information about exactly what needs to happen and what could happen.
Okay.
And I can send you the name of that report. I have it in my notes.
And I would love to invite you back on the show when it comes out, and maybe you can.
Yeah, it's the report, section 3518 from the Defense Authorization Act 2020, the report on vessels for emerging offshore energy infrastructure.
Cool.
So that's the report. That will be big news when it comes out. It may not actually hit the headlines, but it's big news.
That's even better. Even better. Then we can buy the right stocks before others.
Yeah, real opportunity for investors with that information there, for sure. To return to your question, the shipping industry has largely escaped. Well, it wasn't even part of the Paris Accords. So it was kind of left to the IMO, which is a branch of the UN, and it's really lagged behind, so to speak, the rest of the greenhouse gas reduction initiatives. But it's recently gained a lot more teeth. The IMO kind of like sat back and they're like, well, we're gonna do these little things. With good reason. You could bankrupt entire companies if you set up the wrong laws.
They're the International Maritime Organization, and they're this is like self-regulation, and they're doing it like, you could argue it's defensively, because if a country with ports like the Netherlands, which is this green push is extremely popular, if we put regulations on Rotterdam, it's cruise companies that have ships that don't meet that regulation.
Yeah, so you also have the EU is looking at integrating shipping within its waters or something like that, to all of a sudden become part of the cap and trade initiative. So which voting is currently not part of that. And if the EU Parliament set that to motion, they better do it carefully. It needs to happen, but it's really going to be a challenge. And so what's happening in the industry right now, especially with the better positioned, better funded companies, I mean, Maersk is just top of the line, really. But it's really trickling around to everywhere. The solution in the midterm, IMO 2030, they want to reduce CO2 emissions by 30%, 40%, and so that's really it's really going to be a challenge. But so fuel is obviously the biggest aspect of that. But these ships, they're more than just a chunk of steel with an engine and a fuel tank. They're skyscrapers or small cities, just not with many people. And so there's all these different systems within them. Minimum of 3 generators, a whole power grid, separate power grids for different systems. If you're a container ship that moves reefer containers, refrigerated containers, you're going to have a whole power system for them as they come on and offline. And everything from all of the energy systems going down to even hydraulics, hotel amenities, water makers. So really technology, data and analytics and kind of a cat's giving me a hard time.
You're getting attacked.
Yeah, she's getting squirrely. She doesn't like the snow. there's a whole aspect that's going into making ships smarter and therefore more energy efficient. And really, if you just monitor, you know, if you take into account, you know, I want to be in Shanghai on this date at this time, my spot in the dock is reserved for me, then you can basically monitor your fuel flow, just pure motion of fuel as it's going into your engines and your generators, and that runs itself through a data system and can tell you what is your optimum RPM to get there with the best fuel economy at that time. And given you're not just sitting there on a flat highway with cruise control, you're in a dynamic world. The swells, ocean, wind, it's all changing all the time. Ballast, trim of the vessel, all of these things need to get taken into account. And with these systems, and there's many different ways to do it. Some of it you can do it almost virtually with satellite. Some of them are sensor integrated, which I think is really where it's all going to be eventually, kind of this IoT realm. But it can tell you real time as the wind changes, as the swell changes, where your RPM should be to get maximum fuel economy.
Yeah, this sounds like a perfect artificial intelligence job. Like,
yeah, it's I mean, it doesn't even need to be AI. That will help it significantly, especially when you get these whole systems, all, you know, the multitude of systems on board kind of integrated within one smart system. And you know, it can help generators come on and offline. A lot of this technology kind of already exists. There's already, you know, there's autonomous engine rooms that already exist. But so technology is going to be a huge thing. Everything from your systems to being able to identify when you have too much sea growth on your hull. When is it time to clean that off? Because that weights down and causes inefficiency with fuel motoring. As far as fuel goes, the big question, that's the big question. Nobody really knows. There's a lot of arguments. There's a lot of people on each side. Is it ammonia? Is it hydrogen? Is it methanol? Probably not going to be biofuel. But I mean, that has its place. And with these incremental changes, you know, eventually the shipping industry will get to zero emissions. But as ships are being built, you don't just build them to work, you build them to survive a legal environment in an environment of demand for the lifetime of that ship.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? 25 years or 20 years.
Yeah, and so that was the issue with the scrubber installation that happened in IMO 2020. Everybody was scrambling, throwing scrubbers, thinking that the price of heavy fuel was going to be cheap forever, and that this low sulfur alternative was going to be expensive and costly. And then IMO 2020 happened. Everybody installed these expensive scrubbers, betting on the long-term fuel prices being essentially the trend that they had been in, and then the fuel prices tanked. Now everybody with scrubbers are...
Yeah, but the pandemic happened, so you know, I can't really blame people for...
No, it's hard to bet. Hard to bet.
Oh, but so you don't know either, and then what do you think about when does this get resolved, or
in the midterm? So DNVGL, who's one of the largest classification societies in the world, and really at the technological forefront of maritime shipping, they anticipate in the midterm, like really to get to the IMO 2030, LNG is going to play a large part. But LNG is not entirely clean. And if methane regulations come down the pipe, it's really going to smoke that. So LNG, there's a few vessels out there that are using methanol, right
But
now.
just back up for 1 second. The LNG ships, you think
Mhm.
they're getting smoked if there's methane regulation, and methane is actually pretty aggressive gas. I
So
thought that could be solved by like making sure it doesn't leak. Is that can
there are, yeah, there are regasification systems, and it's really a matter of the infrastructure providing the fuel. So will the LNG is a tricky one because our country is going to be producing it. Is there going to be infrastructure for ships to use it? Can they refuel? You're probably never going to really see any type of real LNG infrastructure in the Northeast. Certainly not power plants, Northeast United States. But it does appear to be the best option for shipbuilding, planning for the next 20.
yeah, and
years.
there are quite a few of them, are in operation.
Yep.
So that's why it
I mean,
surprised me a little bit that you were so careful about that technology.
well, it's there. It's still under 1% of the
Sure.
global fleet. So there are quite a few. I mean, there's an LNG cruise ship, and there's the LNG carriers burn LNG, just like an oil tanker burns oil.
Okay.
But it's not. It will certainly be a middle term investment for shipbuilders, but it's not the long term solution. And when you get more robust regulation on just domestic issues regarding LNG and methane, that industry is going to become increasingly scrutinized. And how will that affect shipping? When you're looking at the long term, people are thinking hydrogen and ammonia. That's really difficult to forecast, but there's a lot of investment going into it right now. And a lot of long bets. And with the green energy revolution, offshore, we're building wind farms now that are designed specifically to produce hydrogen. So that's green hydrogen. You can also create blue hydrogen by converting LNG into hydrogen fuel. So there you can't really cut off LNG from the picture, but really the long-term goal is to get rid of all fossil fuel involvement. But DNVGL speculates that in the long term, and it kind of has to do with the power that is within hydrogen versus ammonia or methanol, and the space it takes for the technology to store the fuel and to operate with it. DNVGL it kind of has put its hand predicting that ammonia and methanol will be the long-term winners. Now, that's not to say there's not a lot of great arguments saying it's hydrogen. So I'm not really going to try to predict what it will be.
Sure.
But it's going to be different. And it's interesting.
Yeah, that's always interesting. That's I think it's a great answer, and what I've been really curious about, we don't really know the answer, and we don't know when this is going to be resolved, but it's going to be at some point.
I mean, one important, just a quick important aspect to take into account is that hydrogen is the building block for ammonia and methanol fuels. So hydrogen production is probably going to be pretty important one way or another.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Some people argue it's hard to make it work for transportation that works better for industry, but we'll see, I guess. So,
there's people with doctorates and PhDs that, you know, might have opinions.
no, but they're divided sometimes as well. We'll see. I think is fascinating stuff. Maybe Patrick, if I can ask you one more question, because I don't want to, keep you for hours, and then I hope you will come back in the future, maybe after that report comes out, or we can talk about some of these exciting technologies around propulsion or something different. You are looking at the entire universe, everything there's out there around shipping. What's the most interesting technology or thing that I'm not thinking about, or investors not thinking about? What's got you really excited?
Well, it's, you hear a lot of talk about autonomous cars and autonomous trucks. These days, airplanes practically fly themselves. They pretty much do most of the landing and the takeoff, and somebody hits a joystick and a few buttons. There's so much technology going on behind it, and so autonomous ships, autonomous boats. There is a whole plethora of collaboration and really a lot of the best minds are all working in on this. And you're probably not going to have entirely unmanned ships just peeling across the ocean, driving up into New York Harbor, anytime soon. But in a large portion of that has to do with the international framework. Just doesn't quite exist for that yet. But domestically, there's some really amazing things that are happening. Of course, there's what's happening in Northern Europe with I totally can't remember it's the fertilizer carrier. The Yara Birkeland, she just got launched, and she'll be moving fertilizer products along the Norwegian coast, and there's even a grocer that has signed on to build an autonomous transport ship to move goods and services around there. The EU is really focused. They've started to pump in a bunch of money to create a system of short sea shipping in between ports to help decongest the roads and really reduce emissions. And a lot of what they want to do with that is they're focused in on autonomous vessels, autonomous barges, autonomous ports. Container ports already pretty much exist. There's 10 guys sitting in a room controlling all of the cranes, moving all of the containers around, and then they
where the cranes just do the unloading automatically.
Yeah. And so there really is an autonomous revolution that's happening, kind of noisily, but it's also, there's just so much happening under the surface of it. And when it comes to real shipping, South Korea and Japan separately have both made it, the governments have come out and they've both made it a national initiative to be the first in to the autonomous cargo shipping sector. South Korea is pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into this. They want to capture that market. They want to be the first in and they want to dominate. And so their plan is to have autonomous cargo ships moving coastwise by 2025. Same with Japan, basically the same plan. Slightly less ambitious, but pretty darn ambitious. And so 2025, South Korea wants to have this up and going commercially. Are they going to be run by, an algorithm and drive themselves around? That's not quite where we're at yet. There will be a shoreside facility, an operation terminal, basically, that will do the remote controlling of it. But the long-term goal is to allow computers to gradually take over more and more of the aspect of the operations. And South Korea really has a drive. They have a long-term plan. They want to have 50%, something like 50% of the market share by 2045. I think that's the number. And so they're laser focused in on it, and they've got, a steep culture in it, and have a lot of experience with the technology already.
And it changes the whole game, because if like the cost of the personnel is like 30% on, I think, global vessels.
At least.
Yeah, and if you take out like a big portion of that, suddenly fuel becomes a much larger percentage of cost, and then like how fast you move becomes like a more interesting input. You can move vessels slower, reduce emissions, reduce fuel use. Yes, lots of different things.
And reduce human error.
Sure.
Something like, there's been studies that 70 to 90%, I think is the number, 70 to 90%. This is a study done by an insurer. I can't remember who.
Probably from the UK.
Said that
Lloyd's.
70 to 90 or 95% of all claims of maritime accidents that resulted in payouts were caused by human error, not by mechanical failure.
Hey, and do you happen to know like who owns this these technologies, or who's leading in that field, or?
You see Kongsberg,
right? I've seen that.
And Wärtsilä are really big players in it. But there's just so many kind of small players moving around it. In Korea, South Korea, there's it's fairly difficult to find information on their projects over there. I don't speak Korean very well, so
it's not Hyundai or
yeah, it's the big
Hyundai
players over there, and the technology providers, but also they have a lot of the universities are involved.
Okay.
A lot of the real intelligent, where the brains are at. So
it's still pretty open.
And it ties into 5G. There's a lot of discussion about 5G. You hear it on the radio, and I mean, what do you and I need it for? How, what are we going to do? Download 16,000 movies onto our phone? Really, what I see 5G as is in I think Plymouth, United Kingdom, recently announced they're setting up an entire test bed, an entire sea area for 5G infrastructure just for the maritime industry. And when you have a big ship coming in, how are you going to dock a self-driving ship, or even a remote-controlled one, when you have lag? When you need data points from weather buoys, from shoreside, triangulation towers, you're going to need a whole different system of technology to bring these ships in safely and efficiently. And so 5G in a port is really the kind of the last stone. And that will allow these ships to truly become autonomous, because autopilot in the middle of the ocean, that's easy enough. Just don't hit yachts and try to avoid each other. I mean, I make it sound simple, but
no, but it seems like an ideal environment for autonomous vehicles. Yeah.
So Yeah, it's a big, exciting world, and Thetius, working at Thetius has really, allowed me to see a lot of what's going on with it all. It's really just mind blowing every day. What I'm seeing and learning is just phenomenal. It kind of gives you hope.
No, really, it does. It's super exciting. With that, I want to thank you for coming on the show and helping me understand that Scorpio Bulkers, not due to the windfall I hoped, maybe still do well.
I think they will. Just I wouldn't bet on. I'm skeptical of the domestic industry in my country.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to, and I'm excited to learn why and why you're thinking so. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody who listened, and please like, subscribe, and you'll help me a great deal. And I hope to see you all next time. Thank you. Bye-bye. Oh, wait, one more thing, yep. Patrick.
If you wanna find me or Thetius, Thetius and myself are fairly active on LinkedIn. We're also on Twitter, but that's kind of in the back burner. But yeah, LinkedIn. My name is Patrick Finn, Finn. You can find me. Feel free to contact me for any reason. Also, Thetius, our founder Nick Chubb is on there as well. Just feel free to follow us. We're always posting interesting things, and we do a lot of free webinars and stuff like that. So
there's a lot of great content on Thetius. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks everyone for listening, and bye-bye.